Captain Thornton's voice cut across the Grand Meridian's marble lobby like a blade meant to be heard by everyone within 50 feet. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the entrance. Now." The old man in the oversized jacket did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the ballroom doors where crystal chandeliers glittered and dress uniforms gleamed beneath warm golden light. What Thornton did not know, what no one in that lobby knew, was that the man in the rumpled suit had once carried a bleeding colonel through 400 meters of enemy fire while shrapnel burned at his own flesh. And that colonel was inside right now, about to receive a medal for a life this homeless man had saved. If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below telling us your city or country. And if stories like this one about courage, sacrifice, and second chances speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible true stories that honor the forgotten heroes among us. Now let us continue. The security captain stepped closer, close enough that the old man could smell his cologne, something expensive and sharp that seemed designed to remind everyone in the vicinity that Wesley Thornton was a man of importance. The captain's uniform was pressed to perfection, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, his badge gleaming under the chandelier light. He had been running security for the Grand Meridian for 6 years now, and in that time he had developed an almost preternatural sense for people who did not belong. This one, with his silver beard gone wild and his jacket hanging off bony shoulders like a coat on a scarecrow, this one did not belong anywhere near his event. I said step away. Thornton's voice rose another octave, theatrical now, playing to the well-dressed guests filtering past toward the ballroom. "This is a private function, invitation only, and I'm fairly certain you were not on the guest list." The old man finally turned his head. His eyes were pale blue, faded like denim washed 1,000 times, but something in them made Thornton's next words catch in his throat. Just for a moment, just long enough to notice the way the vagrant stood, weight balanced, shoulders squared despite the stoop of age, hands resting at his sides with an economy of stillness that seemed somehow deliberate. "I just need to see the ceremony, sir." The voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse from disuse, but the "sir" came out automatically, crisp as a salute. Thornton recovered quickly. He had dealt with homeless veterans before, men who wandered in from the cold, claiming connections to events they had no business attending. Most of them were harmless. Some were delusional. All of them were bad for optics. And tonight, with a 4-star general receiving the Military Excellence Lifetime Achievement Award, with senators and admirals and defense contractors filling every seat in that ballroom, the optics needed to be perfect. "The ceremony." Thornton let out a laugh, the kind designed to carry. "Did you hear that, folks?" He gestured to a pair of guests in evening wear who had paused to watch the confrontation. "This gentleman thinks he is here for the ceremony." He turned back to the old man, his smile sharpening. "Let me guess. You served with General Vance himself, right? Saved his life in some top-secret mission nobody ever heard of?" The old man said nothing, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his right hand drifted toward his left pocket where something small and round pressed against the worn fabric of his trousers. "That is what I thought." Thornton stepped forward again, deliberately invading the old man's space. "Look, I do not know where you got that jacket, probably the same donation bin where you found those boots, but you are not fooling anyone. This is a room full of real soldiers, real heroes, and you're making my guests uncomfortable just standing here. So here is what is going to happen. You're going to turn around, walk out those doors, and find somewhere else to spend your evening. I'm going to call the police and have them explain it to you. Your choice." The old man's eyes moved past Thornton, through the open ballroom doors, searching the crowd of uniforms and evening gowns. His lips moved slightly, forming words that made no sound. Then he straightened, and for just a moment something shifted in his bearing. The stoop vanished. The weariness fell away. And what remained was something that did not match the donated clothes or the unkempt beard at all. "With respect, sir, I would like to stay, just until the general receives his award. I will stand in the back. I will not bother anyone. I just need to see him. One more time." Thornton's smile vanished. He had given this vagrant a chance to leave with dignity, and the man had thrown it back in his face. In front of witnesses. That was unacceptable. One more time. The captain's voice dripped with contempt. Right? Because you two go way back, I am sure. Let me tell you something, old-timer. I have seen 100 men like you, shuffling in from the cold, claiming medals they never earned, pretending service they never gave. It is pathetic, and I am not going to let you embarrass yourself any further. He reached out and grabbed the old man's arm, fingers digging into the worn fabric of the jacket sleeve. Enough of this. You are leaving. Now, the old man did not resist. He allowed himself to be turned toward the lobby doors, his movements compliant, his eyes cast down. But across the lobby, a woman in army dress blues had stopped mid-stride. Colonel Diana Okonkwo, retired, now working as a military historian, had been heading toward the ballroom when the commotion caught her attention. She had almost continued on, dismissing it as security dealing with another gatecrasher. But something made her pause. Something about the way the homeless man stood when the captain grabbed him. The way his shoulders squared automatically despite his compliance. The way his free hand remained perfectly still at his side. Fingers relaxed but ready. A posture she had seen 1,000 times in operators who had spent decades training their bodies to be weapons. And then Thornton's grip pulled the jacket sleeve up just an inch or two, and Colonel Okonkwo saw something that made her blood run cold. A tattoo on the old man's inner forearm. Coordinates. A date. And 4 sets of initials arranged around a symbol she recognized instantly. A symbol that had no business being on a homeless man's arm. A symbol that was still classified. Her hand shot out and grabbed a passing waiter's arm. "Get General Vance," she said, her voice tight. "Get him now. Tell him it is about Kiener Province. Tell him it is about Spectre." The waiter stared at her in confusion, but something in her expression made him set down his tray and hurry toward the ballroom. At the lobby doors, Captain Thornton was still lecturing the old man about respect and propriety and knowing one's place. He had no idea that his career had just ended. He had no idea that in exactly 4 minutes, a 4-star general would walk through those ballroom doors, take one look at the homeless man he was trying to eject, and do something that would leave every guest in the Grand Meridian speechless. But the old man knew. Somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the grief and the 15 years of hiding, Raymond Holloway knew that his past had finally caught up with him. And as Thornton's hand tightened on his arm, as the lobby doors loomed closer, he felt the challenge coin in his pocket press against his thigh like a promise he had never been brave enough to keep. "Still here, brother," he whispered to no one. "Still here." The grip on his arm sent Raymond somewhere else entirely. Not the Grand Meridian lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but a dirt road in Kiener Province where the air tasted like smoke and copper and the screaming never stopped. March 7th, 2009, the day that ended everything. They had been 3 kilometers from the extraction point when the first RPG hit. The lead vehicle, a reinforced Humvee carrying Colonel Harrison Vance and 2 CIA handlers, took the blast dead center. Raymond was in the second vehicle, riding Overwatch with his M4 already up when the world turned to fire and thunder. He was out before the dust settled, boots hitting packed earth, moving toward the burning wreck while rounds snapped past his head from the hillside above. Reyes was first out behind him, laying down suppressive fire toward the muzzle flashes. Torres flanked left, drawing enemy attention while Kimball and Sullivan pushed up the slope to neutralize the RPG position. They moved like a single organism, years of training and combat welded into instinct. They had done this 100 times. They would do it again, except they would not. Not ever again. Raymond reached the Humvee as the fuel tank caught. The CIA handlers were already gone, bodies twisted in positions that meant nothing could be done. But through the shattered window, he saw Vance, still alive, pinned by crumpled metal, flames licking toward his legs. The colonel's eyes met his through the smoke, and in them Raymond saw something he had never seen in Harrison Vance before. Fear. He did not think. He reached into the fire. The metal seared through his gloves, through his skin, but he kept pulling. Shrapnel had already found him by then, a piece in his shoulder, another in his thigh, a third grinding against his ribs with every breath. He did not feel any of it. He only felt Vance's weight as he hauled the colonel free, as he draped the man across his shoulders, as he started moving toward the secondary extraction point 400 meters east. Behind him, on the hillside, his brothers were dying. He heard it over the radio. Reyes first, his voice cutting out mid-word. Then Torres, a single grunt and silence. Kimball and Sullivan held the position for another 90 seconds, long enough for Raymond to get Vance behind cover, long enough for the helicopter to appear on the horizon. He heard Sullivan's last transmission. The words burned into his memory like a brand. "Spectre, get him out. We have got this. Go." He went. He carried Vance another 200 meters while his brothers bought time with their lives. He held the colonel in a drainage ditch for 22 minutes, returning fire with one arm while keeping pressure on Vance's wounds with the other. When the helicopter finally touched down, when the medics pulled Vance from his grip, Raymond looked back toward the hillside. Nothing moved. Nothing would ever move there again. The lobby doors pushed open and cold air hit Raymond's face, snapping him back to the present. Thornton was still talking, still lecturing, but the words were just noise now. Background static against the memories that never stopped playing. For men: Reyes, Torres, Kimball, Sullivan. He carried their initials on his skin and their faces in his dreams. He had stood in the hospital room 3 days after the extraction, medals pinned to his chest, watching Colonel Vance thank him for his sacrifice. And all he could think was that the wrong man was lying in that bed. The wrong man had survived. He left the next morning, walked out of the base, out of the army, out of his entire life. The medals went into a trash can outside the gate. The uniform followed. He kept only 2 things: the dog tags that had hung around his neck for 28 years, and the challenge coin Vance had given him before the mission. "Spend it if you ever need anything," the colonel had said. Anything at all. He never spent it. He never would. Because spending it meant admitting he deserved something, and Raymond Holloway knew with absolute certainty that he deserved nothing at all. 15 years. That was how long he had been running. Sleeping under bridges and in shelters, eating from dumpsters and soup kitchens, letting the world forget that Master Sergeant Raymond Holloway had ever existed. He visited the memorial every morning, touched the names of his brothers carved into cold stone, whispered the same words he had whispered 10,000 times before. Still here, still trying. But he was not trying. He was hiding, punishing himself in the only way that felt appropriate, letting the elements and the streets and the slow erosion of time do what the enemy's bullets had failed to accomplish. Then, 3 weeks ago, he had seen the flyer. A Lifetime Achievement Award ceremony for General Harrison Vance, now retired, at the Grand Meridian Hotel. The man Raymond had saved was being honored for 40 years of distinguished service. The man who had spent 15 years searching for his vanished savior would stand at a podium and accept the gratitude of a nation. Raymond had not planned to come. He had told himself 100 times that it was foolish, that he would only cause trouble, that Vance had moved on and forgotten and built a life that had no room for ghosts. But on the night of the ceremony, he had found himself walking 12 miles from the shelter to downtown, feet moving without permission, heart pulling him towards something he could not name. He just wanted to see, one more time, he wanted to know that Vance was okay, that the sacrifice had meant something, that 4 men had not died for nothing. He would stand in the back, invisible, anonymous. He would watch the general accept his award, and then he would disappear again, back into the shadows where men like him belonged. But Thornton had found him. Thornton, with his pressed uniform and his polished shoes and his absolute certainty that appearance was the same as worth. And now the lobby doors were open and the cold was biting through his thin jacket, and the ceremony was starting without him. The captain shoved him toward the threshold, one final push to send him stumbling into the night. But Raymond caught himself, turned, and met Thornton's eyes with something that made the security captain hesitate. "Those men in there," Raymond said quietly. "The ones with the medals on their chests. Some of them earned those medals behind desks. Some of them earned them in offices. But some of them earned them the same way I did. covered in blood that was not their own, carrying brothers who would never walk again, making choices that no human being should ever have to make. You look at me and see trash. You see someone who gave up. But I did not give up, son. I just could not live with what I had to become to survive. Thornton's grip loosened for just a moment, something flickering across his face that might have been doubt. But then his jaw tightened and his hand closed again and the moment passed. Save it for someone who cares, old-timer. You're done here. He pushed Raymond through the doors and into the cold night air. Behind them, in the warmth of the lobby, Colonel Okonkwo was already moving toward the ballroom, her heart pounding, her mind racing through classified files she had studied years ago. And somewhere inside that glittering room, a waiter was whispering 2 words into General Harrison Vance's ear. Kidder Province. The general's champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. Spectre. 15 years of searching. 15 years of guilt and wondering and hoping against hope. And now, finally, Harrison Vance rose from his chair and began walking toward the lobby doors where the only man who had ever saved his life was being thrown into the street like garbage. The reckoning was coming, and nothing would ever be the same. The loading dock behind the Grand Meridian smelled like diesel and rotting produce, a sharp contrast to the perfumed elegance of the lobby. Thornton marched Raymond through the service corridor, with 2 additional security guards flanking them, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls lined with catering carts and stacked chairs. This was where the hotel kept its ugliness hidden, where the machinery of luxury ground along unseen by the guests who paid $300 a plate for the privilege of pretending such places did not exist. Raymond walked without resistance, his gaze fixed on the floor, counting the cracks in the concrete the way he had once counted steps on night patrols. Left foot, right foot. Keep moving. Do not think about what waits at the end. Thornton was enjoying himself. The audience had grown, hotel staff pausing in their work to watch the spectacle, and the security captain played to them with the instincts of a man who had spent his entire life performing authority rather than earning it. This is what happens when you try to crash a military event, he announced to no one in particular. You get escorted out by actual professionals. He turned to Raymond with a smirk. Maybe next time you will think twice before putting on your little costume and pretending to be something you are not. One of the guards, a younger man with nervous eyes, glanced at Raymond's face and then quickly looked away. Something about the old man's expression unsettled him. Not anger, not fear, just a stillness that seemed to belong to a different kind of person entirely. Behind them, following at a distance that suggested professional curiosity rather than casual interest, Marcus Chun kept his phone low and recording. The freelance journalist had been covering the gala for a military affairs publication, expecting nothing more exciting than speeches and handshakes. But the confrontation in the lobby had triggered instincts honed by years of chasing stories in places where the truth hid behind official narratives. Something about this situation felt wrong. The homeless man's bearing, his responses, the way he had straightened when the captain grabbed him. None of it matched the picture Thornton was painting. Further back still, Colonel Okonkwo moved through the service corridor with purpose. She had spent 3 years studying Operation Iron Tempest for a classified after-action review. She had memorized every detail, every coordinate, every name. The operation had been a disaster in many ways for elite operators killed, but it had also produced one of the most remarkable individual actions in modern special operations history. A single soldier carrying a wounded colonel 400 meters through enemy fire, holding a position alone for 22 minutes, refusing extraction until his commanding officer was safely aboard the helicopter. The soldier's call sign had been Spectre. His real name was Raymond Holloway, and according to every official record, he had vanished without a trace 15 years ago. Until now. Thornton shoved open the loading dock doors, letting in a blast of January air that cut through Raymond's thin jacket like a knife. The old man did not shiver. He had spent too many nights in colder places to be bothered by a little wind. End of the line, old-timer. Thornton positioned himself in the doorway, blocking any chance of retreat. The street is that way. I suggest you find a shelter before you freeze to death. Though honestly, that would probably be doing everyone a favor. The two guards exchanged uncomfortable glances. The younger one shifted his weight, looking like he wanted to say something but did not dare. Raymond stood at the edge of the loading dock, looking out at the alley where dumpsters lined the walls and steam rose from grates in the pavement. 15 years ago, he had walked away from everything. His career, his pension, his identity. He had chosen this life, chosen the streets and the shelters and the slow erasure of everything he had been. He had told himself it was penance. He had told himself it was what he deserved. But standing here now, with the ceremony happening somewhere inside, with Harrison Vance accepting an award for a career that had almost ended in fire and blood, Raymond felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not anger, not self-pity. Something closer to grief. For the man he had been. For the brothers he had lost. For all the years he had wasted punishing himself for the sin of surviving. His hand moved to his pocket, fingers closing around the challenge coin that had been his only companion for 15 years. The metal was warm from his body heat, worn smooth from countless nights of holding it in the dark, tracing the eagle and anchor and globe with fingers that remembered how to kill but had forgotten how to live. Spend it if you ever need anything. That was what Vance had said. Anything at all. Did he need something now? Did he even know how to need any more? Captain Thornton stepped closer, mistaking Raymond's stillness for defiance. I said move. His voice had lost its theatrical quality, turning sharp and mean. Or do I need to help you along? He reached for Raymond's arm again, fingers closing around the sleeve of the donated jacket. But this time when he pulled, the fabric rode up past the wrist, past the forearm, exposing skin that told a story no donation bin could provide. Colonel Okonkwo's voice cut through the cold air like a blade. Stop. Do not move him. Thornton turned, irritation flashing across his face. Who the hell are you? Okonkwo stepped onto the loading dock, her dress blues immaculate, her eagles gleaming in the harsh fluorescent light. She did not look at Thornton. Her eyes were fixed on Raymond's exposed forearm, on the tattoo that covered the skin from wrist to elbow. Coordinates: 35.0458 degrees north, 71.0018 degrees east. A date: March 7th, 09, a symbol that most people would not recognize but that made Okonkwo's heart stop. The number 6 with a dagger through it, the unofficial emblem of a unit that officially did not exist. And beneath it all, 4 sets of initials arranged in a pattern that matched 4 names on a memorial wall in Washington. Yoter Mt. DKPS Reyes. Torres. Kimball. Sullivan. Okonkwo's hands were trembling as she stepped closer. She had studied photographs of this tattoo. She had read after-action reports describing the man who wore it. She had written a classified assessment concluding that Master Sergeant Raymond Holloway was almost certainly deceased, lost to the streets or his own demons or some unmarked grave that would never be found. But here he was, alive, standing on a loading dock in a jacket 2 sizes too large, being thrown out like garbage by a man who had no idea what he was looking at. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, cracked with an emotion she could not name. Spectre, my God, you are actually alive. Raymond's eyes met hers for the first time. In them she saw exhaustion and grief and something that might have been relief. 15 years of running, and someone had finally caught up. Thornton looked between them, confusion replacing his earlier confidence. What is this? What are you talking about? Who the hell is Spectre? Okonkwo finally turned to face him, and the contempt in her expression made the security captain take an involuntary step backward. This man, she said slowly, is Master Sergeant Raymond Holloway. Delta Force, 28 years of service. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, 3 Purple Hearts. He single-handedly saved the life of the general who is currently accepting an award in your ballroom. She paused, letting each word land like a hammer blow. And you just dragged him through a service corridor and tried to throw him in the street. The loading dock went silent. Marcus Chun lowered his phone, staring. The 2 security guards looked at each other with expressions of dawning horror. And Captain Wesley Thornton, for the first time in his carefully curated career, had absolutely nothing to say. But Raymond was not looking at any of them. His eyes had moved past the loading dock, past the alley, fixed on something only he could see. "He is really in there," he said softly. "He is really okay." Okonkwo nodded. "He has been looking for you, Sergeant, for 15 years. He never stopped." Raymond closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I did not think I deserved to be found." The loading dock fell into a silence, so complete that Raymond could hear his own heartbeat thudding against his ribs. Colonel Okonkwo stood 3 feet away, her eyes still fixed on the tattoo that had given him away after 15 years of hiding. Behind her, Captain Thornton had gone pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, searching for words that refused to come. Marcus Chun stepped forward, lowering his phone but not stopping the recording. His journalist's instincts told him he was witnessing something that would matter far beyond this moment, something that deserved to be preserved exactly as it happened. "Sergeant Holloway." Okonkwo's voice was gentle now, the sharpness she had directed at Thornton completely absent. "I studied your operation. I read every after-action report, every commendation, every piece of the classified file. What you did that day in Kunar Province was extraordinary." Raymond shook his head slowly, his gaze dropping to the concrete floor. "What I did was survive. That is not extraordinary. That is just luck." "Luck?" Okonkwo let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "You carried a wounded colonel 400 meters through active enemy fire. You took shrapnel in 3 places and kept moving. You held a defensive position alone for 22 minutes against an entrenched enemy force." She paused, her voice catching. "You did all of that while 4 of your brothers died, buying you time to complete the mission. That is not luck, Sergeant. That is the definition of valor." The words hit Raymond like physical blows. He had spent 15 years trying to outrun them, trying to bury them beneath layers of guilt and self-destruction. But hearing them spoken aloud, by someone who had studied what happened, who understood the weight of what he carried, something cracked inside him that he had thought was permanently sealed. They should not have died. His voice was barely a whisper. Reyes was 26 years old. He had a daughter he had never met. Torres was supposed to get married that spring. Kimball and Sullivan were the best operators I ever served with, and they went up that hill knowing they were not coming back down. He looked up at Okonkwo with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. "They died, so I could carry one man to safety. One man. And I've spent every day since then asking myself if that was worth it." Okonkwo held his gaze without flinching. That one man went on to command forces that saved thousands of lives. That one man shaped military policy that protected countless soldiers in combat zones around the world. That one man has spent the last 15 years trying to find you, so he could tell you personally that what you did mattered. Thornton finally found his voice, though it came out thin and uncertain. "This is ridiculous. You cannot expect me to believe that this." He gestured at Raymond's worn clothes, his unkempt beard, his boots held together with tape, "that this is some kind of war hero. Look at him. He is homeless. He is probably mentally ill. Anyone can memorize coordinates and get a tattoo." Okonkwo turned on him with a coldness that made the security captain shrink back. "Those coordinates have never been published. The operation is still classified at the highest levels. The only people who know what happened on that hillside are the survivors, the intelligence officers who debriefed them, and the historians like myself who were granted special access to study it." She stepped closer to Thornton, her voice dropping to something just above a whisper. "So unless you are suggesting that a homeless man somehow infiltrated classified military databases to create an elaborate fictional identity, I suggest you start considering the possibility that you just made the worst mistake of your career." The younger security guard cleared his throat nervously. "Captain, maybe we should, if there's even a chance that what she's saying is true." Thornton's jaw tightened. He was trapped and he knew it. The confidence that had carried him through the confrontation was crumbling, replaced by the dawning recognition that he had built his authority on assumptions that were collapsing around him. Raymond watched the exchange without expression. Part of him, the part that had been a soldier for nearly 3 decades, understood exactly what was happening. The power dynamics were shifting. The truth was emerging. Justice, or something like it, was beginning to take shape. But another part of him, the part that had spent 15 years in penance, felt nothing but exhaustion. "It does not matter," he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. What he did, what he said about me. Raymond's voice was flat, drained of emotion. He was not wrong. Look at me. I chose this. I chose to walk away from everything, to live like this, to become exactly what he saw when he looked at me. A broken man, a waste, someone who gave up. You did not give up. Okonkwo's voice was fierce. You survived something that would have destroyed most people. You carried guilt that was never yours to carry. And you're still here, still standing. After everything. Raymond's hand went to his pocket again, fingers finding the challenge coin that had been his only constant for 15 years. He pulled it out and held it in his palm, the metal catching the harsh fluorescent light. Okonkwo recognized it immediately. The unit coin of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, given only to those who had served with distinction in the most elite unit the Army had ever produced. "He gave me this before the mission," Raymond said softly. "Told me to spend it if I ever needed anything." He turned the coin over, revealing the inscription on the back. "For Spectre, the bravest man I know. A.V. Harrison Vance." Okonkwo breathed the name like a prayer. "I kept it all these years because I was afraid of what it meant." Raymond closed his fingers around the coin, afraid that if I spent it, I would have to admit that I was still alive, that I still existed, that somewhere out there, someone remembered who I used to be. He looked up at the loading dock doors, toward the warmth and light of the hotel beyond, toward the ballroom where the man who had given him that coin was receiving an award for a lifetime of service. "I came here tonight because I heard he was being honored. I just wanted to see him one more time, to know that it meant something, that they did not die for nothing." Okonkwo stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm, right over the tattoo that had marked him as a ghost returned from the dead. "Then come with me," she said. "Let him see you. Let him know that his search is finally over." Raymond hesitated. The fear was still there, coiled in his chest like a living thing. 15 years of hiding, 15 years of convincing himself that he did not deserve to be found. And now he was being asked to step back into the light. But then he thought of Reyes, who never got to meet his daughter. Of Torres, who never got to say his vows. Of Kimball and Sullivan, who died on that hillside so he could complete the mission. He thought of their sacrifice, their courage, their absolute certainty that what they were doing mattered. And he realized that hiding was its own kind of betrayal. That by punishing himself, he was diminishing what they had died to protect. His fingers tightened around the challenge coin. "Okay," he said quietly. "Take me to him." Okonkwo nodded, something like relief flooding her features. She turned toward the service corridor, toward the ballroom, toward the moment that would change everything. Behind them, Captain Thornton stood frozen on the loading dock, watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him. Marcus Chun captured it all on his phone, already composing the story in his head. And Raymond Holloway, call sign Spectre, took his first step back toward a life he had abandoned 15 years ago. The hardest part was not the walking. It was believing he still had the right to. The service corridor stretched before them like a tunnel between worlds. On one end, the loading dock with its diesel smell and harsh lights. On the other, the ballroom where 400 guests in evening wear and dress uniforms celebrated a general's lifetime of service. Raymond walked between those worlds with Colonel Okonkwo at his side, each step carrying him closer to something he had spent 15 years running from. Marcus Chun followed at a respectful distance, his phone still recording. Captain Thornton trailed behind as well, though whether from duty or morbid curiosity, Raymond could not tell. The younger security guard had disappeared, perhaps sensing that whatever was about to happen was above his pay grade. The sounds of the ceremony grew louder as they approached. Polite applause, the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation that filled the spaces between speeches. Raymond's heart hammered against his ribs with each step. His palms were slick with sweat. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else, moving forward through sheer momentum rather than conscious will. "Sergeant," Okonkwo's voice was low, meant only for him. Are you all right? Raymond did not answer immediately. The question itself seemed absurd. Was he all right? He had not been all right in 15 years. He had not been all right since the moment he watched 4 men die on a hillside so he could carry 1 man to safety. He had not been all right since he walked away from everything he had ever known and let the streets swallow him whole. But he was still moving. That had to count for something. I do not know how to do this, he finally said. I do not know how to be the person he remembers. Okonkwo slowed her pace, turning to face him. The fluorescent lights of the corridor cast harsh shadows across her features, but her eyes were kind. You do not have to be anyone but who you are right now. General Vance has been searching for you for 15 years. He does not care about your clothes or your beard or where you have been sleeping. He cares that you are alive. She paused, letting the words sink in. That is all he has ever cared about. Raymond looked down at his hands. They were rough and weathered, the knuckles scarred from fights he barely remembered, the nails cracked and dirty. These were not the hands of a hero. These were the hands of a man who had given up on himself. But they were also the hands that had pulled Harrison Vance from a burning vehicle. The hands that had carried him through enemy fire. The hands that had held a position alone for 22 minutes while bullets snapped overhead and his brothers lay dying on a hillside behind him. Maybe the hands themselves had not changed. Maybe only his understanding of them had. A door ahead opened suddenly, and a woman in army dress greens stepped into the corridor. She was in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair, pulled back in a tight bun, and the bearing of someone who had spent decades commanding respect. Her name, Tag Red Vega, and the insignia on her collar marked her as a retired sergeant major. Diana. Her eyes moved from Okonkwo to Raymond, taking in his appearance with a single comprehensive glance. The waiter found me. Said you needed me. Something about Kiener Province and a ghost. Okonkwo nodded toward Raymond. Lorraine, meet Master Sergeant Raymond Holloway. Call sign Spectre. The man who saved General Vance's life. Sergeant Major Vega's expression did not change, but something shifted in her eyes. Raymond recognized it immediately. The look of someone who understood exactly what she was seeing, who knew the weight of the words that had just been spoken. My God, she said softly. He is actually alive. That seems to be the general reaction, Raymond said. It was the closest thing to a joke he had managed in years, and it surprised him almost as much as it surprised the others. Vega stepped closer, studying his face with an intensity that would have made most people uncomfortable. But Raymond had been studied by masters of interrogation, by enemies who wanted him dead, by commanders who held his fate in their hands. A sergeant major's scrutiny was nothing compared to what he had already survived. I run a reintegration program for combat veterans, she said. Nova Burea Ukragi. No paperwork that takes 6 months to process. Just a place where people who have seen what you have seen can start finding their way back. She paused. General Vance is one of my biggest supporters. He funds half our operations. And every time I see him, he asks the same question. Have you found any trace of Spectre? Raymond felt something tighten in his chest. 15 years. 15 years of believing he had been forgotten, that he had successfully erased himself from the world, that no one was looking for the broken man he had become. And all that time, Harrison Vance had been searching. Why? The word came out rough, almost angry. Why would he keep looking? I walked away. I abandoned everything. I let him think I was dead. Vega shook her head slowly. Because you saved his life, Sergeant. Because he spent 3 months in a hospital bed wondering why the man who carried him out of hell did not come to visit. Because he woke up one morning and found out you had vanished. And he has never stopped blaming himself for not getting to you sooner. She stepped even closer, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. He thinks you disappeared because of him. Because the weight of saving him was too much to carry. He has been trying to find you so he could tell you that it was not your fault. That you did not fail anyone. That what you did was the bravest thing he ever witnessed. Raymond's vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway, sliding down his weathered cheeks and losing themselves in his unkempt beard. 15 years of running. 15 years of punishment. and the man he had saved had been carrying his own guilt the entire time. Okonkwo touched his arm gently. We need to keep moving. The ceremony is almost over. If we do not get there soon, he will leave, and this moment will pass. Raymond wiped his face with the back of his hand. The tears had caught him off guard, an ambush from emotions he had thought long dead. But they had also loosened something in his chest, some knot of tension that had been coiled there for so long he had forgotten it existed. Okay, his voice was steadier now. Let's go. Vega fell into step beside Okonkwo, and together the three of them moved toward the ballroom doors. Behind them, Thornton followed in silence, the wreckage of his assumptions trailing behind him like debris after a storm. The corridor ended at a service entrance to the ballroom. Through the gap in the doors, Raymond could see the glitter of chandeliers, the gleam of metals on dress uniforms, the movement of waiters carrying silver trays. And at the far end of the room, standing at a podium beneath a spotlight, an old man with 4 stars on his shoulders was speaking into a microphone. General Harrison Vance, the man Raymond had carried out of hell, the man who had never stopped searching. Raymond's hand found the challenge coin in his pocket one last time. He gripped it tight enough to feel the edges bite into his palm. Still here, brother, he whispered, still trying. And then he pushed open the doors and stepped into the light. The ballroom was a cathedral of light and ceremony. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic rainbows across tables draped in white linen. 400 guests filled the space, a sea of dress uniforms and evening gowns, metals gleaming on chests, diamonds sparkling at throats. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted lamb, and the particular electricity that gathered whenever powerful people congregated in one place. At the podium, General Harrison Vance stood in the spotlight, his 4 stars catching the light like small suns. He was 74 years old now, his hair gone silver, his face lined with decades of command. But his voice still carried the authority that had moved armies, shaped policy, and inspired generations of soldiers to follow him into places where death waited with patient certainty. Raymond stood just inside the service entrance, hidden in the shadows where the waiters gathered between courses. The ballroom stretched before him like a vast ocean, and the podium where Vance stood seemed impossibly far away. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to slip back through the service corridor, to return to the anonymity of the streets where no one knew his name or expected anything from him. But Okonkwo stood at his right shoulder and Vega at his left, and their presence held him in place like anchors. Vance was speaking, his words amplified by the microphone, but somehow still intimate, as if he were addressing each person in the room individually. A lifetime of service, the general said, means nothing without the men and women who served alongside you. Every decision I made, every success I achieved, was built on the sacrifice of soldiers who gave more than I could ever repay. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something raw and unguarded that made several guests lean forward in their seats. But there is one soldier I have never been able to repay, one man whose sacrifice haunts me to this day. Raymond felt his breath catch in his throat. 15 years ago, in a province that most of you have never heard of, my convoy was ambushed by enemy forces. The lead vehicle, my vehicle, took a direct hit from an RPG. I was trapped in the wreckage, flames closing in, certain that I was about to die. Vance's voice wavered slightly, the first crack in his composure that Raymond had ever witnessed. And then a man appeared through the smoke. A soldier. He reached into that fire with his bare hands and pulled me free. He carried me 400 meters through enemy fire while his own body was riddled with shrapnel. He held a position alone for 22 minutes until extraction arrived. He saved my life. The ballroom had gone completely silent. 400 people sat motionless, drinks forgotten, conversations abandoned, every eye fixed on the general at the podium. His call sign was Spectre. His name was Master Sergeant Raymond Holloway. And after that mission, he vanished. Vance's hand gripped the podium, knuckles white with the force of his grip. I have spent 15 years looking for him. I have hired investigators, put out word through every network, followed every lead. I never found him. I never got to tell him that what he did mattered, that the life he saved went on to do things worth saving, that not a single day has passed without me thinking of him, praying that wherever he is, he knows he did not fail. Raymond felt the tears returning, hot and insistent, blurring his vision until the ballroom became a smear of light and color. So tonight, as I accept this award, I want to dedicate it to him. Vance lifted the crystal trophy that had been presented to him moments before Raymond entered. To Spectre, to the bravest soldier I ever served with. Wherever you are, brother, I hope you can hear me. I hope you know that you saved more than just my life that day. You saved everyone I went on to help, every soldier I protected, every family that got their loved one home because of decisions I was alive to make. His voice broke completely, and he paused to collect himself before continuing. You did not fail anyone. You never failed anyone. And if I could see you one more time, that is what I would tell you. The applause began slowly, a single pair of hands somewhere near the front, then spreading like wildfire through the room. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, 400 people standing in tribute to a man they had never met, a ghost whose sacrifice had made possible everything they were celebrating tonight. But Raymond did not hear the applause. He did not see the standing ovation. All he could see was Harrison Vance at the podium, tears streaming down the old general's face, holding a trophy that meant nothing compared to the man he had been searching for. Go to him. Vega's voice was soft but urgent. Go now, before the moment passes. Raymond's feet would not move. 15 years of hiding had calcified into something physical, a weight that held him rooted to the floor. He had dreamed of this moment, feared it, longed for it in the darkest hours of the night. And now that it was here, he did not know how to reach for it. Okonkwo stepped in front of him, blocking his view of the ballroom, forcing him to meet her eyes. Sergeant Holloway, listen to me. That man up there's been carrying guilt for 15 years. Guilt that was never his to carry. Every day, he wakes up wondering if you are alive, if you are suffering, if there was something he could have done to save you the way you saved him. She gripped his shoulders with both hands, her fingers digging into the worn fabric of his jacket. You have the power to end that right now. You have the power to give him peace. Is that not worth more than your fear? Raymond stared at her, his mind churning through 15 years of self-imposed exile. He had convinced himself that disappearing was a kindness, that Vance was better off without the burden of a broken soldier haunting his conscience. But he had been wrong. His absence had not freed Vance from guilt. It had multiplied it. Every year that passed without answers had added another layer to the weight the general carried. By running, Raymond had not spared anyone. He had only made the suffering worse. The realization hit him like a physical blow, staggering him backward half a step. All those years, all that pain, and it had all been for nothing. No, not nothing. It had been a mistake. But mistakes could be corrected. Wounds could be healed. And ghosts sometimes could come back to life. He looked past Okonkwo to the podium where Vance still stood, the applause finally beginning to fade, the general gathering himself to step down and disappear into the crowd of well-wishers. Now, Vegas said, it has to be now. Raymond reached into his pocket and pulled out the challenge coin. He held it in his palm for a moment, feeling its weight, its warmth, its promise. Then he closed his fingers around it and stepped forward. The crowd was still standing, still applauding, still focused on the podium. No one noticed the disheveled, old man emerging from the service entrance. No one saw him begin the long walk across the ballroom floor. No one understood that the ghost, General Harrison Vance, had been searching for was finally coming home. But Vance saw. Vance, stepping down from the podium with the trophy in his hands, happened to glance toward the back of the room. And what he saw stopped him cold. A man in an oversized jacket, a silver beard, pale blue eyes that he would recognize anywhere, in any lifetime, no matter how many years had passed. The trophy slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound cut through the applause like a gunshot, and 400 heads turned to see what had happened. But General Harrison Vance did not notice the broken crystal at his feet. He did not hear the gasps from a crowd. He saw only one thing. Spectre. The word left his lips as barely more than a breath. But in the sudden silence of the ballroom, everyone heard it. The ballroom held its breath. 400 guests stood frozen in place. Champagne flutes suspended mid-toast. Conversations dying on lips. Every eye fixed on the tableau unfolding before them. At the podium, General Harrison Vance stood amid the shattered remains of his Lifetime Achievement Award, crystal fragments glittering at his feet like fallen stars. And 30 feet away, walking slowly across the ballroom floor, a ghost was coming home. Raymond felt every step like a journey across continents. The plush carpet beneath his taped boots seemed to stretch endlessly, the distance between him and Vance expanding and contracting with each heartbeat. He was aware of the stares, the whispers beginning to ripple through the crowd, the phones being raised to capture whatever was happening. But none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the old man standing at the podium with tears streaming down his face. Vance moved first. He stepped down from the stage, heedless of the broken glass that crunched beneath his polished shoes, and began walking toward Raymond with the deliberate pace of a man afraid that moving too quickly would shatter an illusion. His lips formed words that made no sound. His hands trembled at his sides. 4 stars gleamed on his shoulders, marking him as one of the most decorated officers in the history of the United States Army. But in this moment, he looked like nothing more than an old man confronting a miracle he had stopped believing in. They met in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by tables of stunned dignitaries, beneath chandeliers that cast their light down like benediction. For a long moment, neither man spoke. They simply stood there, 2 feet apart, separated by 15 years of silence, and brought together by something that transcended time. Spectre. Vance's voice cracked on the word, breaking it into fragments. Is it really you? Raymond's throat tightened. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind, imagined what he would say, how he would explain, what words could possibly bridge the chasm of years and guilt and self-destruction. But now that he was here, standing before the man whose life he had saved and whose search he had evaded, every rehearsed phrase dissolved into nothing. "I am sorry, sir." The words came out rough, barely audible. "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I did not come back. I'm sorry I let you think I was dead." Vance shook his head violently, his hand coming up to grip Raymond's shoulder with a strength that belied his age. No, do not apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have found you sooner. I should have been there when you needed help. I failed you, Spectre. I failed you. You did not fail anyone, General. Raymond felt his composure crumbling, the walls he had built over 15 years beginning to crack and splinter. I was the one who ran. I was the one who could not handle what happened. I watched 4 men die, so I could carry you out, and I could not live with that. I could not accept that their lives were worth less than yours or mine. So I disappeared. I punished myself because I did not know how else to make it right. The confession poured out of him like blood from a wound, words he had never spoken aloud, truths he had buried so deep he had almost forgotten they existed. The ballroom, full of witnesses, faded into irrelevance. There was only Vance, only this moment, only the unburdening of 15 years of silence. Vance listened without interrupting, his grip on Raymond's shoulder never loosening. When Raymond finally fell silent, the general pulled him into an embrace so sudden and fierce that it drove the breath from both their lungs. "You carried me," Vance said, his voice muffled against Raymond's shoulder. "You carried me through hell, and you never stopped. And then you carried the guilt of surviving when they did not. You have been carrying weight your whole life. Spectre, when are you going to let someone carry you?" Raymond could not answer. His throat had closed completely, sealed by emotions he had thought long dead. He stood in the center of a ballroom, in the arms of a 4-star general, and for the first time in 15 years, he wept without shame. The guests watched in stunned silence. Some of them had pieced together what was happening, connecting Vance's speech about the soldier called Spectre with the disheveled man, now sobbing in the general's arms. Others remained confused, uncertain why their evening of celebration had transformed into something so raw and unexpected. But all of them sensed that they were witnessing something sacred, a moment that belonged to the two men at its center and not to the observers who happened to be present. Sergeant Major Vega stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She positioned herself a few feet away, close enough to offer support, but far enough to respect the intimacy of the reunion. Colonel Okonkwo stood beside her, one hand pressed to her chest, watching the scene with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with genuine human emotion. She had studied Operation Iron Tempest for years, had written assessments and analyses, had reduced it to data points and tactical lessons. But nothing in her research had prepared her for this. The living reality of two men broken by the same moment, finally finding each other after 15 years of searching in the dark. Behind them, at the edge of the service corridor, Captain Thornton stood in shadow. His face had gone gray, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like horror. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had done. He had mocked this man. He had dragged him through the hotel like garbage. He had threatened to have him arrested for the crime of wanting to see an old commander one more time. And that man, that vagrant he had dismissed as worthless, was currently being embraced by a 4-star general in front of 400 witnesses. Thornton's career was not just over. It was being cremated in real time. Vance finally pulled back from the embrace, his hands moving to grip Raymond's shoulders, holding him at arm's length so he could look at him properly. His eyes moved across Raymond's face, cataloging the changes that 15 years of street life had wrought. The deep lines, the weathered skin, the beard that had gone from black to silver, the haunted look that lurked behind pale blue eyes. "You look terrible," Vance said. Raymond let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "I know. We're going to fix that." The general's voice hardened into the tone of command that had shaped his entire career. "Starting tonight, you're coming home with me. No arguments. No running. You hear me, Sergeant?" Raymond hesitated. The instinct to flee was still there, whispering that he did not deserve this, that he would only bring more pain, that the kindest thing he could do was disappear again and let Vance return to his life. But he looked at the old general's face, at the tears still wet on his cheeks, at the fierce determination in his eyes, and he knew that running again would break something in both of them that could never be repaired. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "I hear you." Vance nodded once, sharply, as if a tactical objective had been achieved. Then he turned to face the ballroom full of stunned guests, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I need to introduce you to someone." He stepped aside, one hand still resting on Raymond's shoulder. "This is Master Sergeant Raymond Holloway, call sign Spectre, the man who saved my life 15 years ago and then vanished before I could thank him properly." He paused, letting the words settle over the crowd like a benediction. "I've been searching for him ever since. And tonight, by some miracle I do not pretend to understand, he found his way back to me." The silence stretched for one heartbeat, 2, 3, and then the ballroom erupted. The applause crashed over Raymond like a wave breaking against stone. 400 people on their feet, hands coming together in a thunder that shook the chandeliers and rattled the crystal glasses on every table. He stood rooted to the carpet, overwhelmed by the sound, by the faces turned toward him, by the sheer impossibility of what was happening. For 15 years, he had been invisible, a shadow moving through shelters and soup kitchens, a nameless figure huddled beneath bridges, a ghost that society had learned to look through rather than at. And now, suddenly, violently, he was seen, every eye in the room fixed on him, every hand applauding for him, every voice rising in tribute to a man they had learned about only moments ago. It was too much. His legs began to buckle, and only Vance's steadying hand on his shoulder kept him upright. "Easy, soldier." The general's voice cut through the noise, low and calm and meant only for him. "I have got you. Just breathe." Raymond forced air into his lungs. The ballroom swam before his eyes, faces blurring into smears of color, the applause becoming a wall of sound that pressed against him from all sides. He had faced enemy fire without flinching. He had carried a wounded man through 400 meters of hell. He had held a position alone for 22 minutes while his brothers died. But this recognition, this acceptance, this moment of being seen after so long in darkness, was almost more than he could bear. The applause began to shift, transforming into something more structured. Near the front of the room, a young captain in dress blues raised his hand to his brow in a crisp salute. A moment later, a colonel followed suit, then a retired admiral, then a brigadier general. One by one, the veterans in the room snapped to attention, hands rising in tribute to a fellow soldier whose sacrifice they now understood. The civilians watched in awe as half the ballroom transformed into a forest of salutes. Some reached for their phones, capturing the moment. Others simply stood in reverent silence, bearing witness to something they knew they would never forget. Raymond's hand moved without conscious thought, rising to return the salute with the precision of 28 years of muscle memory. His spine straightened, his shoulders squared. For a moment, the homeless man in the oversized jacket disappeared, and in his place stood Master Sergeant Raymond Holloway, Delta Force, the soldier he had tried so hard to bury. Vance watched the transformation with tears still wet on his cheeks. This was the man he remembered. This was the soldier who had reached into fire to save him. This was Spectre, returning from the dead. At ease, Vance said quietly, and Raymond's hand dropped to his side. The salutes lowered throughout the room, but the applause continued, building again to a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Grand Meridian. Raymond stood in the center of it all, shell-shocked and trembling, trying to process a reality that bore no resemblance to anything he had imagined. Colonel Okonkwo appeared at his side, her eyes bright with emotion. "Sergeant Holloway, I want you to know that what happened in Kunar Province has been studied at every level of military training. Your actions that day are considered one of the finest examples of individual valor in modern combat history." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "It is an honor to meet you, sir." Raymond shook his head slowly. "I'm not a sir. I'm just a man who did what needed to be done. That is exactly what makes you worthy of the title." Before Raymond could respond, Sergeant Major Vega stepped forward, positioning herself between him and the crowd that was beginning to surge closer. The applause was fading now, replaced by excited conversation and the movement of people wanting to approach, to shake his hand, to be part of the story that was unfolding before them. "General," Vega said crisply, "we should move him somewhere quieter. This is a lot to process. He needs space." Vance nodded, his protective instincts engaging immediately. "You are right. Raymond, come with me. There's a private room off the main hall. We can talk there." But as they began to move toward the edge of the ballroom, a voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Wait." Captain Thornton stepped out of the shadows near the service corridor, his face a mask of desperation. He had been watching the scene unfold with growing horror, watching his career disintegrate with each passing second, watching the homeless man he had dragged through the hotel being saluted by generals and admirals. And now, with nothing left to lose, he was making one final gamble. "General Vance." Thornton's voice carried across the quieting ballroom. "I need to explain what happened. There has been a misunderstanding." Vance turned slowly, his expression shifting from warmth to ice in the span of a heartbeat. He released Raymond's shoulder and took a step toward the security captain, and something in his bearing made Thornton take an involuntary step backward. "A misunderstanding." The general's voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried an edge that made several nearby guests flinch. "Please, enlighten me." Thornton swallowed hard, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. He looked nothing like the man who had mocked Raymond in the lobby, who had dragged him through the service corridor, who had tried to throw him out onto the street like garbage. He looked small, frightened, desperate. "I did not know who he was, sir. He looked like, his appearance suggested that he did not belong. I was doing my job, protecting the event." "Protecting your event, sir? How was I supposed to know that a homeless man was actually a war hero?" The ballroom had gone silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of 400 people watching a man dig his own grave with every word. Vance continued his slow approach, each step deliberate, predatory. "And how exactly did you protect my event, Captain?" "By grabbing a decorated veteran by the arm and dragging him through a service corridor? By threatening to have him arrested for trespassing? By mocking his service and calling him a liar?" Thornton's face went white. "How did you know about that?" Colonel Okonkwo stepped forward, her phone in her hand. "The journalist recorded everything, Captain. Every insult, every threat, every moment of your contempt for a man who has sacrificed more than you could possibly imagine." She paused, letting the words sink in. "It is already being uploaded. By morning, everyone will know exactly how the Grand Meridian Hotel treats its veteran guests." Thornton looked like he might be sick. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. The full weight of his situation was finally crashing down on him, and there was nowhere left to run. But before Vance could continue his advance, before the reckoning could proceed, Raymond spoke. "General, wait." Vance stopped, turning to look at the man he had spent 15 years searching for. Raymond stepped forward, positioning himself between Vance and Thornton. His voice was quiet but steady, carrying the calm authority of a man who had faced far worse than an arrogant security captain. "He did not know," Raymond said. "He looked at me and saw exactly what I wanted the world to see. A broken man, a failure, someone not worth noticing." He paused, his eyes meeting Thornton for the first time since the lobby. "I cannot blame him for believing it. I believed it myself for 15 years. The ballroom held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Thornton stared at Raymond as if seeing him for the first time. The homeless man he had dismissed as worthless, the vagrant he had dragged through the service corridor, was now standing between him and a four-star general, offering something that looked impossibly like mercy. The ballroom remained frozen, 400 witnesses holding their breath, waiting to see how this moment would resolve. The tension hung in the air like smoke after a firefight, thick and acrid and suffocating. Raymond held Thornton's gaze without flinching. There was no anger in his eyes, no satisfaction at the captain's downfall, no hunger for revenge. There was only a weariness that ran bone deep, the exhaustion of a man who had spent 15 years at war with himself and no longer had the strength for additional enemies. "I have carried enough guilt for one lifetime," Raymond said quietly. "I do not need yours added to the pile." He glanced back at Vance, then returned his attention to Thornton. "You made assumptions based on what you saw. You were wrong. But being wrong is not the same as being evil. It just means you were not paying close enough attention." Thornton's mouth worked silently, struggling to form words that would not come. He had prepared himself for condemnation, for rage, for the kind of righteous destruction that powerful men often visited upon those who had wronged them. He had not prepared for this. He had no framework for processing forgiveness from a man he had treated like garbage. "Sergeant Holloway." Vance's voice was tight, with barely controlled emotion. "This man humiliated you in front of witnesses. He accused you of stolen valor. He tried to throw you into the street. You do not owe him anything." Raymond turned to face the general fully, and something in his expression made Vance fall silent. "With respect, sir, I have spent 15 years punishing myself for surviving when better men died. I have slept under bridges and eaten from dumpsters and let the world forget I ever existed, all because I could not forgive myself for carrying guilt that was never mine to carry." Raymond's voice grew stronger as he spoke, drawing on reserves he had not known he still possessed. "I know what it feels like to be trapped by your own mistakes. I know what it feels like to wish you could take back something you did. And I know that destroying this man will not undo what happened. It will just create more wreckage." He turned back to Thornton, who stood trembling like a man awaiting execution. "You judge me by my appearance. You assume that because I looked broken, I must be worthless." Raymond stepped closer, and despite everything, Thornton did not retreat. "But every veteran you see on these streets, every man or woman who looks like they have given up, remember that they might have carried weight you will never understand. Do not judge. Do not assume. Just remember that what you see on the surface is never the whole story. The words hung in the air, settling over the ballroom like a blanket. Several guests wiped at their eyes. Others nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson embedded in Raymond's grace. Thornton finally found his voice, though it came out cracked and thin. "I'm sorry." The words seemed to cost him everything. "I am so sorry. I did not know. I should have known. I should have looked closer." Raymond nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than absolution. "Now you know. What you do with that knowledge is up to you." He turned away from Thornton, effectively dismissing him, and faced Vance once more. The general was staring at him with an expression that mixed pride with something deeper, something that looked almost like awe. "You always were the better man, Spectre." Vance's voice was rough with emotion. "Even when you did not believe it yourself. I am not better than anyone, sir. I am just tired of carrying anger on top of everything else." Sergeant Major Vega stepped forward, her professional demeanor softened by visible emotion. She placed a gentle hand on Raymond's arm, the first physical contact he had allowed from anyone other than Vance since entering the ballroom. "That kind of wisdom does not come easy," she said quietly. "It comes from surviving things that should have destroyed you and choosing to become something other than bitter." She paused, her eyes searching his face. "I have seen a lot of broken soldiers, Sergeant Holloway. Some of them let the breaking turn them mean. Others let it turn them wise. You were one of the wise ones." Raymond did not know how to respond to that. Wisdom implied understanding, and he understood very little about how he had ended up here, in this moment, surrounded by people who seemed to see something in him that he had never been able to see in himself. The crowd was beginning to stir now, the frozen tableau thawing as conversations resumed in hushed tones. Several people had begun moving toward the small group at the center of the ballroom, drawn by curiosity or the desire to be part of history. Marcus Chun had lowered his phone, but remained close, his journalist's instincts telling him that the story was not over yet. "General." Colonel Okonkwo stepped closer, pitching her voice low enough that only those in the immediate circle could hear. "The press is going to want a statement. This is going to be everywhere by morning. We need to control the narrative." Vance nodded slowly, his command instincts engaging even as his personal emotions continued to churn. "You are right." He looked at Raymond with a question in his eyes. "Are you ready for that? For people to know who you are, what you did?" Raymond considered the question. For 15 years, he had hidden from exactly this kind of recognition. He had buried Master Sergeant Raymond Holloway so deep that he had almost convinced himself that person had never existed. The thought of emerging back into the light, of having his story told, of becoming visible again after so long in shadow, terrified him in ways that enemy fire never had. But he looked at Vance, at the tears still drying on the old general's cheeks, at the hope burning in his eyes. He looked at Okonkwo and Vega, at the veterans throughout the room who had saluted him, at the civilians who had wept during his story without ever having met him. He thought of Reyes and Torres and Kimball and Sullivan, his brothers who had died on that hillside, so he could complete the mission. They had not died so he could hide. They had died so he could live. "I am ready," Raymond said quietly. "I am done running." Vance's face split into a smile that transformed his weathered features, stripping away decades of command and responsibility to reveal something almost boyish underneath. "Then let us go write the next chapter together, Spectre, starting with getting you out of that jacket and into something that fits." Raymond looked down at his oversized donated jacket, at the boots held together with electrical tape, at the clothes that marked him as someone society had discarded. Then he looked up at the ballroom, full of dress uniforms and evening gowns, at the world he had abandoned 15 years ago. For the first time since March 7th, 2009, he allowed himself to imagine a future. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was finally impossibly real. The private room off the main ballroom was a study in contrasts. Leather chairs and mahogany tables spoke of wealth and power, while Raymond stood in its center, looking like a man who had wandered in from another world entirely. Which, in a sense, he had. Vance had commandeered the space with the efficiency of a man accustomed to having his orders followed without question. Within minutes, The room had filled with a carefully selected group. Colonel Okonkwo, Sergeant Major Vega, Marcus Chun with his journalist's notebook, and a retired admiral named Whitmore who had served on the Joint Chiefs during Operation Iron Tempest and had specifically requested to meet the soldier whose actions he had reviewed in classified briefings. Raymond sat in one of the leather chairs, his hands wrapped around a glass of water that someone had pressed into his grip. He had not asked for it, but he found himself grateful for something to hold, something to anchor him to the present moment while the world rearranged itself around him. Admiral Whitmore stood near the window, his decorated chest catching the light as he studied Raymond with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable under other circumstances. But Raymond had been studied by masters of interrogation, by enemies who wanted him dead, by commanders who held his fate in their hands. An admiral's scrutiny was simply one more thing to endure. I reviewed the after-action reports personally, Whitmore said finally, his voice carrying the gravel of decades of command. What you did that day, Sergeant Holloway, was beyond exceptional. You carried Colonel Vance 400 meters through active enemy fire while wounded in 3 places. You held a defensive position alone for 22 minutes against an entrenched enemy force. You refused extraction until your commanding officer was safely aboard the helicopter. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. The tactical analysts who studied the engagement concluded that your survival was statistically impossible. You should have died on that hillside. Raymond stared at the water in his glass, watching the light refract through the liquid. I should have, he said quietly, for better men did. The room fell silent. Vance moved to stand beside Raymond's chair, one hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture that was both protective and grounding. Tell me about them, Vance said softly. Tell me about the men who died that day. I never got to know them. I was unconscious for most of it, and then you were gone before I could ask. Raymond closed his eyes. The memories were always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for moments like this to surge up and pull him under. But for the first time in 15 years, he did not fight them. He let them come. Staff Sergeant Miguel Reyes, he began, his voice steadying as he spoke. Point man, 26 years old. He had a daughter back home that he had never met. She was born while we were deployed, and he carried her ultrasound photo in his vest pocket. Said he was going to teach her to ride a bike when he got back. He was first out of the vehicle when the ambush hit. First to lay down covering fire. First to die. The room listened in absolute stillness. Okonkwo had produced a small recorder and held it up with a questioning look. Raymond nodded almost imperceptibly, and she pressed record. Sergeant First Class Antonio Torres. Flanker. He was supposed to get married that spring. Had the ring in his rucksack, was going to propose the day he got home. He drew enemy fire to give me time to reach the burning vehicle. Took 3 rounds before he went down. Kept shooting until he could not hold his weapon anymore. Vega wiped at her eyes, making no effort to hide her emotion. Admiral Whitmore stood rigid by the window, his jaw clenched tight. Staff Sergeant Derek Kimball and Sergeant First Class Paul Sullivan. Raymond's voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. They were the best operators I ever served with. Brothers in every way that mattered. They went up that hill knowing they were not coming back. They held the RPG position long enough for me to get the colonel to cover. Sullivan's last transmission was telling me to go, to complete the mission. He paused, his hand moving unconsciously to his forearm where their initials were inked into his skin. I heard them die over the radio. Both of them. And then there was silence. Vance's grip on Raymond's shoulder tightened. His own eyes were wet, his composure crumbling as he finally learned the details of what had happened while he lay unconscious in Raymond's arms. I carried their dog tags for 3 years, Raymond continued. All 4 sets. I was going to return them to their families personally. But I never did. I could not face their wives, their parents, their children. I could not look them in the eye and explain why I was alive and their husbands and sons and fathers were dead. He opened his eyes, staring at nothing. So I disappeared. I let the army declare them heroes and me a ghost. I thought it was easier that way. For everyone. It was not easier, Vance said quietly. Their families spent years wondering what happened to the soldier who was with them when they died. They wanted to meet you. They wanted to thank you for being there, for making sure their loved ones did not die alone. He crouched down beside Raymond's chair, bringing himself to eye level. I have letters, Spectre. Letters from Reyes's daughter, who is 15 now. Letters from Torres's fiancé, who never married anyone else. Letters from Kimball's mother and Sullivan's father. They all wrote to me, asking if I knew where you were, asking me to tell you that they do not blame you, that they never blamed you. Raymond's carefully maintained composure finally shattered. A sound escaped his throat that was part sob, part moan, the release of 15 years of guilt and grief compressed into a single moment of breaking. He bent forward in the chair, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the force of emotions too long suppressed. Vance wrapped his arms around him and held on. Okonkwo and Vega moved closer, forming a protective circle around the two men. Admiral Whitmore remained by the window, his own eyes suspiciously bright, bearing witness to something that transcended rank and protocol and military formality. They do not blame me, Raymond repeated between sobs. They never blamed me. Never, Vance confirmed. Not once. Not ever. The only person who ever blamed you, Spectre, was you. The words penetrated the armor Raymond had built over 15 years, reaching something wounded and festering at his core. He had convinced himself that the families must hate him, must curse his name, must wish that he had died instead of their loved ones. He had used that imagined hatred as fuel for his self-destruction, as justification for his exile, as proof that he deserved nothing good. And it had all been a lie. A lie he had told himself because the truth was too terrifying to accept. The truth that he was allowed to live. That surviving was not a sin. That carrying on was not a betrayal of the dead, but a way of honoring them. I want to meet them, he said finally, his voice raw and broken. The families. I want to tell them what their sons and husbands did. How brave they were. How they saved my life and yours and never hesitated. He looked up at Vance through tear-blurred eyes. Can you help me do that? Vance smiled through his own tears. Brother, I have been waiting 15 years to help you do exactly that. The news broke before dawn. Marcus Chen's story hit the Military Affairs publication's website at 4 a.m, accompanied by the video footage that had captured everything. Thornton's mockery in the lobby, the confrontation on the loading dock, the revelation of the tattoo, and the reunion in the ballroom that had left 400 guests in tears. By sunrise, it had been picked up by 3 major networks. By noon, it was everywhere. Raymond watched the coverage from the guest room of Vance's Virginia estate, wrapped in a robe that probably cost more than everything he had owned for the past 15 years combined. The television mounted on the wall showed his own face, gaunt and bearded, alongside photographs from his service record that he barely recognized. The young soldier in those photos had clear eyes and a confident smile. The man in the mirror had neither. Homeless veteran revealed as decorated war hero, the anchors intoned. Secret savior of 4-star general found after 15 years. The Grand Meridian confrontation that exposed a legend. Vance appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He crossed the room and settled into the armchair beside Raymond's, passing one of the cups over without a word. They sat in silence for a moment, watching a cable news panel debate the implications of the story. They're going to want interviews, Vance said finally. Every network, every magazine, every podcast with a military angle. You're going to have to decide how much of yourself you want to share. Raymond took a sip of the coffee. It was rich and dark, nothing like the watered-down dregs he had grown accustomed to in shelters and soup kitchens. Even this small luxury felt foreign, like something meant for someone else. I do not know if I have anything worth sharing, he said quietly. I ran away. I hid for 15 years. That is not exactly an inspiring story. Vance shook his head slowly. You survived, Spectre. You survived something that destroys most people, and you found your way back. That is the story. That is what matters. He paused, his eyes fixed on the television screen. There are thousands of veterans out there, right now, going through exactly what you went through. Living on the streets. Convinced they do not deserve help. believing they failed when they actually succeeded beyond any reasonable measure. He turned to look at Raymond directly. Your story could reach them. Your story could save lives. Raymond considered this. He had spent so long thinking of himself as a cautionary tale, an example of how a soldier could fall apart after combat. It had never occurred to him that his fall might also contain the seeds of resurrection, that his journey through darkness might illuminate a path for others still lost in it. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sergeant Major Vega entered without waiting for an invitation. Her phone pressed to her ear. I understand, she was saying. Yes, I will tell him. She ended the call and looked at Raymond with an expression he could not quite read. That was the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense wants to meet with you personally. Apparently the story has reached the highest levels. Raymond felt the familiar urge to flee rising in his chest. The thought of sitting across from the Secretary of Defense, of being scrutinized by the most powerful military officials in the country, made his skin crawl. He was not ready for this. He would never be ready for this. But then he thought of Reyes's daughter, 15 years old now, who had grown up without a father. He thought of Torres's fiancée, who had never married anyone else. He thought of all the families who had written letters asking to meet the soldier who had been there when their loved ones died. He owed them more than his fear. I will meet with him, Raymond said. But I have conditions. Vega raised an eyebrow. You want to set conditions for the Secretary of Defense? I want the families included. Raymond's voice grew stronger as he spoke. Reyes, Torres, Kimball, Sullivan. Their families should be there. They should be part of whatever recognition happens. They lost more than anyone. They deserve to be seen. Vega's expression softened. She glanced at Vance, who was nodding slowly, a proud smile spreading across his face. I will make it happen, she said. Whatever it takes. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and arrangements. Colonel Okonkwo arrived in the afternoon with a preliminary report on the fallout from the Grand Meridian incident. Captain Thornton had been terminated from his position, though Raymond had declined to press any charges. The hotel had issued a public apology and made a substantial donation to a veterans housing fund. The video of the confrontation had been viewed over 10 million times and was still climbing. But it was the other news that hit Raymond hardest. The families are coming, Okonkwo told him. All of them. Reyes's daughter, Elena. Torres's fiancée, Maria, who runs a foundation in his name now. Kimball's mother and Sullivan's father. They are flying in tomorrow. They want to see you. Raymond sat very still, processing the information. 15 years of avoiding this moment. 15 years of running from the faces of the people he had failed to save. And now they were coming to him, and there was nowhere left to hide. I do not know what to say to them, he admitted. I do not know how to explain why I never came, why I let them wait so long. You do not have to explain, Vega said gently. She had been a constant presence throughout the day, quietly ensuring that Raymond was not overwhelmed by the tsunami of attention. You just have to show up. That is all they have ever wanted. Just to see you, to thank you, to know that you are okay. But I'm not okay, Raymond said. The words came out before he could stop them, raw and honest in a way he had not allowed himself to be in years. I am broken. I have been broken for 15 years. What if they see that and realize I was not worth saving after all? Vance moved to sit beside him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. Listen to me, Spectre. Being broken is not the same as being worthless. Every soldier who has seen real combat carries cracks. The question is not whether you are damaged. The question is whether you are still willing to try. He paused, letting the words sink in. Are you still willing to try? Raymond thought about the question. He thought about the years under bridges, the nights in shelters, the slow erosion of everything he had once been. He thought about the challenge coin in his pocket, worn smooth from years of holding it in the dark. He thought about the 4 men who had died so he could live, and the families who had waited 15 years to meet the survivor. Yes, he said finally, I'm still willing to try. Vance smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. Then, that is all that matters. Everything else we figure out together. That night, for the first time in 15 years, Raymond slept in a real bed with clean sheets and a roof that did not leak. He slept deeply and without nightmares, his hand curled around the challenge coin that had been his only companion through the darkness. And somewhere in his dreams, for soldiers stood on a hillside, watching over him, finally at peace. 6 months later, Raymond stood before a circle of folding chairs in a community center on the outskirts of Washington. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the coffee in the corner was weak and lukewarm, nothing like the rich brew at Vance's estate. But Raymond preferred it this way. This was where the real work happened. This was where soldiers came to heal. Sergeant Major Vega's reintegration program had grown since that night at the Grand Meridian. The viral video had brought attention, and attention had brought funding, and funding had allowed them to expand from one cramped office to 3 full facilities across the country. Raymond had become the face of the program, though he still resisted that description. He was not a face. He was just a man who had been where these soldiers were now, and who had somehow found his way back. The circle held 8 veterans today, their ages ranging from 23 to 61, their wounds ranging from visible to invisible. Some wore the hollow look that Raymond recognized from his own reflection in shelter windows. Others maintained the rigid posture of soldiers still at war with enemies who existed only in their memories. All of them had come here because they had run out of other places to go. "My name is Raymond," he began, the words familiar now after months of repetition. "My call sign was Spectre, and I spent 15 years believing I did not deserve to live." The circle listened in silence as he told his story. The ambush in Kinnor Province. The 4 brothers who died. The years of running and hiding and punishing himself for the sin of surviving. He told them about the shelters and the bridges, the soup kitchens and the cold nights when he had prayed for an ending that never came. He told them about the Grand Meridian, about being dragged through the service corridor, about the moment when a 4-star general had embraced him and told him that he had never failed anyone. And then he told them about the families. "Elena Reyes was 15 when I finally met her," Raymond said. "She had her father's eyes. Same deep brown, same spark of mischief underneath the seriousness. She showed me a photograph she carried in her wallet. Her father holding her as an infant, taken a week before he deployed. She said she had been carrying it since she was old enough to understand what it meant." He paused, letting the memories settle over him. The meeting with the families had been the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the firefight, harder than the years on the street. He had walked into that room expecting condemnation and had found only gratitude. Elena had hugged him and called him Uncle Ray. Maria Torres had wept and thanked him for being with Antonio at the end. Kimball's mother had pressed her son's bronze star into his hand and asked him to keep it, because she knew Derek would have wanted him to have it. "They did not blame me," Raymond continued. "None of them blamed me. They just wanted to know that their sons and husbands and fathers had mattered, that their sacrifice had meant something. And standing in that room, looking at their faces, I finally understood that surviving was not a betrayal. It was an obligation. I owed it to the men who died to live a life worthy of their sacrifice." A young woman in the circle, a Marine who had lost both legs to an IED in Afghanistan, wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. An older man, Vietnamera by the look of him, nodded slowly as if Raymond's words had confirmed something he had long suspected but never been able to articulate. Raymond leaned forward in his chair, his voice dropping to something more intimate. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you that it gets easy," he said. "It is not. I still have nightmares. I still wake up reaching for brothers who are not there. Some days, the guilt comes back so strong that I can barely breathe. But I have learned something in these past 6 months, something that took me 15 years to understand." He looked around the circle, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. Healing is not about forgetting. It is not about moving on or getting over it or any of the other things people tell you. Healing is about learning to carry the weight without letting it crush you. It is about honoring the dead by living, not by dying alongside them. He paused, his hand moving unconsciously to the challenge coin that still rested in his pocket. The greatest act of courage is not charging into enemy fire. It is accepting help when you need it. It is admitting that you cannot do this alone. It is walking into a room like this one and saying the words that terrify you most. He straightened in his chair, his voice growing stronger. So here is what I want you to know. You're not alone. You're not worthless. You are not beyond saving. I spent 15 years believing all of those things, and I was wrong. Every single one of you has already survived things that would have destroyed most people. That is not weakness. That is strength. And if you can survive that, you can survive this too. You can find your way back. I know because I did. The session continued for another hour. Other veterans sharing their stories, their struggles, their small victories, and devastating setbacks. Raymond listened to each one with the attention of a man who understood exactly how much courage it took to speak these truths aloud. When the session finally ended, he stayed behind to talk with anyone who needed an extra moment, an extra word, an extra assurance that they were not as alone as they felt. Later that evening, Raymond drove to the memorial. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the names on the wall caught the dying light like prayers carved in stone. He found the 4 names he was looking for and pressed his palm against the cold marble, feeling the grooves of the letters beneath his skin. Still here, brothers, he said quietly. Still trying. We got 4 new people into the program this month. 3 of them are already in transitional housing. 1 is going back to school. Can you believe it? He smiled, the expression coming easier now than it had 6 months ago. Elena graduated high school last week. Top of her class. She's going to study medicine. Says she wants to save lives like her father did. I think he would be proud. He stood there until the sun finished setting, until the memorial lights flickered on and cast their steady glow across the names of the fallen. Then he walked back to his car, where Vance was waiting in the passenger seat. The general had insisted on coming along, as he often did. He said it helped him too. How are they doing? Vance asked as Raymond slid behind the wheel. Raymond considered the question. The 4 names on the wall. The 8 veterans in the circle. The thousands more who were still out there, still struggling, still waiting for someone to tell them that they were not beyond saving. They're doing the best they can, he said finally. Same as all of us. Vance nodded, satisfied with the answer. He reached over and squeezed Raymond's shoulder, the same gesture of connection and grounding that had anchored him on that night at the Grand Meridian. Same as all of us, he repeated. And that is enough. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible, that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, please subscribe to our channel. And right now on your screen, you will see another incredible story waiting for you. Click it, watch it, and remember that every person you pass on the street has a story. Some of them might just be legendary. Thank you for watching. Raymond started the car and pulled away from the memorial, Vance beside him, the challenge coin warm in his pocket. The road stretched ahead, illuminated by headlights that pushed back the darkness 1 mile at a time. Behind him, 4 soldiers stood eternal guard over a hillside that existed only in memory. And ahead of him, for the first time in 15 years, there was a future worth driving toward. Some wounds never fully heal. Some weight never fully lifts. But sometimes, if you're brave enough to accept help, if you are strong enough to keep trying, you find your way home. Master Sergeant Raymond Holloway, call sign Spectre, had finally stopped running. And in his wake, he left a trail of light for others to follow.